Thanks, Vic. I'm glad to be here again.
We're so glad to have you back. The first thing I wanted to ask you about, Christopher, is how did finding out about all of these cases impact your life?
Well, that's an interesting question. The first thing that occurred to me was that I needed a bigger gun. I actually went looking for elephant rifles around the time I started worrying about this. Well, I don't say worrying about it. It's not like it's my main concern. Like, I don't want people to think I'm crazy, that I spend all my time worrying about werewolves, for lack of a better word, or dogman attacking. But one of the first things I did was I thought about it. Okay, I looked at the rifles that I had for hunting and self-defense, and I thought, these might not cut it. So I went out and bought a rifle in a caliber called 416 Rigby. That's normally used for hunting elephants, rhinos, Cape buffalo, things like that. Just on the theory that, if something did turn up, it wouldn't hurt to make sure I had enough gun. I sometimes joke about it with the people that I talk to at gun shops and such, like, yeah, that's my Sasquatch rifle, contrasting it with some people have AR-15s, but they call their zombie rifles. I just say, well, zombie rifles are passe. I got to have my gun for Sasquatch and werewolves. And they usually just laugh, but then some people nod, and you wonder, what did they see or what have they been thinking? I used to live in what I'd call the ghetto when I was younger, in my 20s when I was going to law school. And it was an area where, you had guys down the street are cooking meth. You got the guys on the other side, crack house, but rent was pretty cheap. So that's where I lived because I could walk to my classes. And when I lived there, it was just a element of wariness that you had to have, situational awareness. You'd look around you, and you know that something could happen. The same way you know that if you look out on a cloudy day and see the storm clouds coming, that it might rain. And since I've become more aware of the idea that there's unknown canine predators as well as other vicious animals out there in North America, I have young children, so even if we're just out in our own yard, I try to keep an eye on them. I don't want them to be the one that just wanders off or is last in line or goes behind the corner and vanishes. Because I've read about parents who would take their eyes off their kids for literally 10 minutes, and then their child's gone from their own yard and mutilated. So it's something I just pay more attention to my surroundings. I keep a very close eye on my children. I've developed a habit. I haven't had my ghetto days of always going armed. I will carry a pistol even if I'm just taking out the trash or if I go out after dark. And just during the day, a lot of times I don't like to go out unarmed anymore. I don't know how much good a handgun would really do against one of these things, but since people beat them off with sticks and rakes and other improvised weapons, I thought it'd be better than nothing. It makes me feel better anyway. Slim comfort is better than none.
Oh, I'd say it is. A 416 Rigby. Wow, that's shoulder-fired artillery right there.
Yeah, it's a classic elephant cartridge. I chose that one because it was always a favorite of those who hunt truly dangerous game. Traditionally, the chamber pressures are lower than a lot of the more modern 416 cartridges. So in a bolt-action rifle, you're a lot less likely to have it jam up on you if you really need it, which I thought, well, if I'm going to need this for something like that, I'm really going to need it. So that's why I had my elephant gun, as I like to call it. I figured it would also work on anything smaller than an elephant, and it's a nice conversation piece, if nothing else, albeit very strange conversations. That's almost like a whole other topic. I think I've figured out some things about why people are shooting these things and having it not too much damage, and I think it's the very nuts and bolts reason that you're dealing with thick hides and muscle mass, so you're dealing with lack of penetration. You can actually shoot a fairly conventional animal, the good old moose that people are quite familiar with in North America. If you shoot one at, say, I don't know, 200-300 yards with a 30-06, even if you loaded it with something other than rapidly expanding bullets, sometimes those bullets just plain don't penetrate the moose hide. So I don't see why these things wouldn't be any different. I have to believe that if they're eating people, that they're a nuts and bolts creature, and that would mean that they could be hurt or that they could be killed or that they could be dissuaded. So that's why I take some comfort in having even a pistol with me when I'm out and about.
Yeah, if that 416 Rigby doesn't get the job done, then I don't know what would.
Yeah, the only downside to a 416 Rigby is you can't exactly tote it around with you all day. It's They're like your special occasions gun that lives in the closet.
Oh, I'd say. Well, Christopher, let's get into these cases. We have quite a few we still need to cover. The first case I want you to tell us about is the Amy Jo Rowe Bechtel case.
Yes, that one was right here in Wyoming. I believe she was actually covered in one of David Paulides' Missing 411 books. I think she's been the subject of several TV documentaries of those kind that run on the cable news channels along the nature of Disappeared. Amy was a fairly young woman. She was in excellent condition. She wanted to be an Olympic marathoner. She'd been married for about a year to her husband, and she went out one day to run errands and never came back. Her car was eventually found, and it was found along a trailhead. Near as anyone can tell, her gym was going to be having a marathon in this section. It was near the mountains. And this is actually right near the area where our very first case we talked about with the Wind River Indian Reservation. It's actually right in that same general area, except this was sometime before. This was in 1997. And so, as near as they could tell, they found Amy's car out at the trailhead. It looked like she'd been scouting the route. It was an area she'd been in before. She was in excellent physical condition. And her car's there, her purse is there, her keys are there, but she's not there. It's almost as though she got out of her car, walked a little ways up, and just vanished. And to this day, she's never been found. She's one of these people who is going through their daily life and something just snatches them up or snatches them away. Police actually looked at her husband initially because they ran out of other theories. He got a lawyer, so that delayed the process of them looking at other suspects. But he did eventually pass a lie detector test and was cleared. There's been other theories saying, a serial killer or a mountain lion, something like that. But here we have another disappearance over a period of time in the same area where we know we've had some unusual fatal animal attacks. So it just struck me as making me wonder if some of these people that we hear about that go missing and are never found, if this is what ends up happening to them. And I can't say that's specifically what happened to her, but I found it very interesting that she was in the same geographic area that we had one of our other cases. Now, I haven't had a chance to research extensively the topic of missing people in the area where some of these dog attacks came up, but I have a feeling that if this is something else that someone else wants to look into as well, that they're going to find that in some of these areas where we've had these reported dog attacks, that I would posit are not really dog attacks, but are something else, that in some of these areas you're going to find strange missing persons cases or people just going out to do their business one day and then bam, they're never seen again.
Can you imagine being her husband? Someone comes and notifies you of your wife's disappearance, and then next thing you know, the police are investigating you for the murder? That's horrible.
I think he was in a hard spot. Some people would blame him for getting a lawyer and only answering questions to the lawyer, but I don't know really what else he could have done, especially being innocent. The lie detector test eventually cleared him, which people say that there's problems with those, so they're not scientifically admissible. But the police obviously thought it was good enough because they stopped looking into the suspect after that. But it did take quite some time, and it illustrates the way that when things that are strange happen, police and authorities naturally try and look for a pattern that they're more familiar with. Thus, if someone's badly mauled or eaten, they'll try and think, well, that must be dogs, that must be bears, that must be something like that. Or if someone vanishes, they try and look for a conventional explanation, saying, oh, well, must have been foul play or something of that nature.
Well, I'm glad the police department decided to lay off of him after that lie detector test. That had to be a really tough time for him. In your research, you found out about a myth that the Shoshone tribe had about a shape-shifting wolf creator god. Please tell us what you know about that.
Yes, I'm not an expert on Native American mythology, but I found it interesting that the Shoshone tribe is one of those that's at the Wind River Indian Reservation, and they have a long and storied history of the importance of wolves in their tribal culture. One of their creator gods is actually a wolf that would take human form, and that in their stories they say created mankind and then would then come and visit the people or the tribe in the form of a man. Some of these myths seem to be that it's a shapeshifter that takes human form, whereas others would suggest that it's a wolf walking upright with a man's head, which I believe is also a motif showing up in other Indian cultures, that there's a definite history in North America of wolf wolf-like deities, wolf-headed deities, wolf creator gods, wolves that are considered to have some kind of supernatural powers or be in some way possessed of human characteristics.
You know what they say, where there's smoke, there's usually fire. With all these Native American legends such as that one, it sure makes you wonder if there isn't something to them, and that's how they came to be. Please tell us about the Lothar Karl Schwager case.
Lothar and his wife were actually both killed. They were somewhat older, you're talking about in your 60s or 70s, but still in very good health. Here you have a couple that was running a sanctuary for dogs. So they'd raised dogs, they were familiar with dogs, they'd had large dogs. Now what's interesting is that their large dogs started to go missing. In fact, Lothar's wife was out one morning in her car searching for one of their pit bulls that had vanished, and she was driving along slow down a county road. Correction, she was walking down the county road looking for the dog, and something happened to her. She was attacked by what the police said were a dog or dogs, but she was very badly mutilated, very badly mauled. Lothar was out driving, apparently also trying to help in the search for these dogs that had been going missing. Near as they can tell, he came along the scene, he parked the car, he got out, and there was what was described as scenes of a scuffle. It looked like he had been trying to fight off whatever was attacking him. He was able to get his cell phone out, but he was not able to place a call. So whatever got to him was able to take on a man and take him down before he could even push a speed dial button to call 911. There was a great amount of bloody footprints where apparently he was trying to fight. He went down into the ditch, and that's where they found all sorts of large paw prints, which led to the theory that it was some kind of large dog or dogs that was doing this. What's interesting in this case is that even days after the attack, a reporter for the New York Daily News was out at the scene and remarked that there was a very strange and very powerful odor still lingering in the area, which of course brings to mind various reports of Dogman, Bigfoot, and other cryptid creatures where people complain of these strange and unusual overpowering odors. And here we also have a case that's like some of the others I mentioned, where it seems as though animals were going missing or disappearing, particularly domestic dogs. You had people who were well experienced with dogs, who knew about dogs, who you think wouldn't be prone to fall prey to a dog attack. And yet here they are, both being killed within a very short period of time. You have two adults killed, torn to ribbons, no witnesses, no one hears anything. We know the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was there. We know they were taking DNA samples. But all we have, at least to the public, is, well, it must have been a pack of wild dogs. Never mind that no one had reported a pack of wild dogs in the area. Never mind that no one saw a pack of wild dogs after this. They needed an explanation, so they made something fit, is what it seemed to me happened in this case.
In instances where you have the GBI on scene investigating a case, do you know of any times when the FBI has also showed up to help investigate? Or if the GBI is on scene, does that mean that the FBI won't intervene?
It seems as though there's been a number of these cases in Georgia, and it was specifically mentioned that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was always sending agents there. On a national level, you'll see the FBI agents involved in pretty much all the cases on Indian reservations. The FBI does have jurisdiction over major crimes on Indian reservations, so if it looks like a homicide or certain other crimes they have jurisdiction over, they will investigate. With an animal attack, while it's possible that the local field agent would go out there if it was just a pedestrian animal attack or someone fell off their roof changing shingles or something, just to basically check the box to see what happened with his untended death, once it was ruled accidental, the investigation would stop. However, you'll find with some of these animal attack cases that you'll have the FBI involved throughout the investigation. There's reports that even after the coroners release the information, oh, this was an accidental death, it's an animal attack, that you still have FBI agents in the area questioning people, as well as reports of things like black government sedans and individuals who aren't necessarily identifying themselves as being with specific agencies, but saying, I'm Agent so-and-so, and did you see anything? Did you hear anything? What do you know? Just asking questions. That's why I refer to it only half-jokingly as the Men in Black show up with some of these cases. That it seems like there is, in some cases, a federal response, that you have either agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation or other unnamed agencies present, including cases where you wouldn't think they'd have jurisdiction. I've been able to find out that there's been reports of FBI agents on the scene of some of these animal attacks that did not happen on Indian reservations, where the Federal Bureau of Investigation would, in theory, not have any jurisdiction or not have anything to do with the case. That was just a normal animal attack, if that's what it was. And I've heard from researchers in the Bigfoot community that they sometimes run across the same thing, that when something strange happens, that they soon find out that the FBI has been on the scene or other federal agents have been on the scene questioning people or securing an area or taking evidence, and yet it's never entirely clear what agencies are involved or what they're trying to do. So that is certainly something that's given me pause in some of these cases. It seems like in Georgia they've had enough cases of it. It almost seems as though there's a unit with the Georgia state authorities that they've designated to respond to these things and try and take evidence and secure scenes, as opposed to the federal level.
That's interesting. Let's talk about the Israel Pope Jr. case.
This is another case with an elderly gentleman. This happened back in 2007. Israel Pope Jr. was actually 96 years old, so he'd lived a long life, but he was known to still get along on his own, still walk to the store, and to try and maintain independent living. Then one day he simply didn't show up. His relatives didn't find him at home. No one could find him. He seemed to have just walked out his front door and vanished. Approximately 3 days later, they found his remains in the nearby woods. The coroner actually said they may never know the cause of death because he was so badly mutilated that they couldn't establish what precisely killed him. They know that he'd been ripped apart, that he was basically, literally in this case, torn limb from limb and partially devoured. And near as anyone could tell, he was another one of those cases where he walked out his front door one day and something got him. There's no way to tell the time of death, whether it happened in the morning or at night. He was known to take morning walks. So I'm wondering if this is another one of those early morning attack cases. He vanishes, and then 3 days later we find his remains in the woods. Local authorities eventually released, well, it must have been some kind of dog attack. Yet no dogs were ever found, no dogs were ever presented, no one was charged in the matter for letting their dogs run around loose. Nothing like that happened. You just have an old gentleman going about his routine, and one day he's never seen again. And in this case, he's found, and when he is found, he's been eaten. They have to tell the public something, so they say it was a dog attack. For all I know, it was a dog attack, but I just find the circumstances mysterious as it's beginning to fit a pattern that I think is emerging with some of these cases we're discussing, wherein people, particularly those who would be elderly, children, those with cognitive impairments, or those that would, for some reason, show a weakness, are essentially being taken from the herd by an unknown canine predator. And this is another one of those cases where we know that DNA samples were being taken. There were suggestions and comment columns from local papers that it was canine DNA found, but nothing's done in the way of follow-up beyond a media release that, yes, this is terrible, someone was killed by dogs. There's no in-depth coverage beyond that. It's almost like the media wants to drop the case. Paulides Bigfoot is another one of these cases where you have a child that goes out to play in an area that's presumed to be safe, their own neighborhood, their own yard, a park, and suddenly they're gone. In this case, Paulides Bigfoot goes out to play. This is 2007. She's out there for only a little while. When the adults go to check on her, she's gone. They eventually found her in tall grass about 100 yards from her home, and she's been mutilated. Again, torn to bits, shredded, partially devoured. Now, in this case, they initially thought, well, there's a neighbor that has pit bulls. It must have been his dogs. They must have got loose and got to it. So that was the story that initially ran in many media outlets. And you'll still see this today in some of these cases. If you look them up, you'll find media reports saying, oh, well, this was a pit bull fatality. But the interesting thing in this case is that the dogs that were the neighbors that they tried to blame it on, in this case, the owner stood up to him. He said, well, no, this wasn't my dogs. They didn't get loose. They didn't kill her, etc. So there was testing done on these dogs. They were examined to see if there was blood on them. Their DNA swabs were taken. And sure enough, The dogs that initially in all the media coverage said, oh, it was these pit bulls, it wasn't them. They were cleared. And then no other dogs were ever suggested as being the culprits. So again, we have either the case of either something was watching to take a child when they were at their most vulnerable, or we have a random pack of dogs in an area that no one's ever seen, no one sees during the attack, no one hears, and no one ever sees again. This is another one of those cases where I can't say, was this dog man, was this actually just random dogs, but just fits the pattern of just a strangeness and really makes you want to keep a close eye on your children if you have young children when they're outside. To just take nothing for granted, because even if you want to say that there was no unknown predator responsible for some of these deaths, you still have something that's taking and killing children from their own yards in 21st century America. That's certainly worrisome. You can't argue with the fact that these deaths are happening. They're very brutal, very tragic. So it becomes a question of what's going on here. Can we prevent it? Is there anything we can do? And regardless of what anyone might think as to what might be the cause, I would just urge, just keep that extra eye on your children. Maintain that situational awareness. Anastasia Bingham's another case, a 6-year-old child. We initially blame pit bulls again. They say, oh, well, there were some pit bulls in the area. And the media coverage will say, oh, here's a pit bull-related death, because it fits a pattern in the media that people are familiar with, that they could identify with all the stories about how pit bulls are dangerous, and people will think it's a tragedy, but they'll be able to relate to it. They'll be able to classify it and file it in their head. And yet here again, we have the dogs that are initially said to be blamed, neighborhood pit bulls, eventually being cleared. And that part gets buried in the fine print weeks later in the paper, where there'll be a front page story that says little girl killed by pit bulls. Maybe 2-3 weeks, even months later, there'll be a fine print story like, oh, local pit bulls cleared in death of young girl. In this case, the pit bulls were cleared. It wasn't them. But you have a little girl. She goes out to play. She's 6 years old. No one sees the attack. No one hears anything. And by the time someone comes out and finds her a short period of time later, she's been killed, torn to bits, badly mutilated, and partially eaten. So it becomes a question, again, of what's doing this. It becomes where you just don't want to be complacent anymore with your children, where when you think all the predators and all the dangers are gone, here's something that's still out there. There's still something killing children in America today, especially young ones, vulnerable ones. And I've said it before, I think it's something picking off the weaker ones from the herd, that there's a predator at work here. Brayden Carson was 4 years old. He was out in his own yard, and something took him. His aunt was quoted as saying in the media that whatever happened had to have happened in a 10-minute window when his mother went to take a shower and wasn't watching. During this 10-minute window, he apparently went outside into his own yard and just vanished. He was found laying in tall grass only 90 feet from his front door, and he had been torn to ribbons, partially devoured. And again, no one saw anything. No one heard anything. His mother had called it in almost immediately as soon as she noticed him missing, and the searchers came to the area and began searching the area. And yet here he is found within sight of his own house. You're talking 30 yards. He should have been able to see his house. If something grabbed him from his own front door, I don't know if he was lured outside, if something attracted him outside, or why he decided to go outside. Maybe he was innocent. Maybe he was going out to get his toy. I don't know. But something got to him in 10 minutes. It was only 10 minutes, they said, that he wasn't being supervised, that he wasn't being watched. He goes outside, something gets him from his own yard. So my question is, what was there? What was there hiding in tall grass near this boy's house? Was there something watching the house? Was something planning this out? It seems almost like there was a certain intelligence, almost as though something knew that there was a small prey animal in that house and knew exactly where to hide, where to attack from, and where to take its kill. And again, we're told that this was random dogs that just happened to be in the area, that there's just random dogs wandering through suburban neighborhoods that tear apart children. And to me, that sounds almost as unbelievable when you hear how it's being said to happen again and again and again, that it seems as though Dogman or an unknown canine predator becomes almost less unbelievable than the idea that all parts of suburban America are harboring packs of wild, carnivorous, child-stealing dogs that no one ever sees, and that are somehow able to keep their presence secret, or that are able to attack silently and in a matter of minutes grab people. That to me is about as mind-boggling as the idea of an unknown canine predator doing this. But we're told that it was dog bites. We're told these dogs got the boy. But it bothers me. This one really bothers me because it was such a short period of time, and his mother was, by all accounts, a very good mother, tried to keep an eye on the boy, tried to keep him safe, and she took her eye off him for just a few minutes to do something that she'd probably done hundreds of times before, except this time something got him. And it really makes me wonder, are we safe in our own houses? You hear these stories of Dogman trying to tap at windows or peering into windows or trying doorknobs. I'm starting to think this might be why they sometimes do that, is that they're looking for a good victim. And I'm thinking that sometimes they're finding these victims, that they're able to, if they're able to find a target of opportunity, that some of them will take it. And that is what I think may have happened in this case.
When you have to worry about being safe in your own home from one of these things, that does take it to a whole new level. Please tell us about the Mary Jo Hunt case.
Mary Jo Hunt's another one of these interesting cases where we have someone who is engaged in the habit of rescuing and fostering dogs who ends up torn apart in a dog attack. Now, in Mary Jo Hunt's case, we have confusing stories playing on the local media. It's known that she actually had 10 to 15 dogs in her home, and that she did have several pit bulls, and in the end, the pit bulls were what was blamed. But what we know happened raises several questions. Mary was apparently out in the yard. She was working with her dogs, as she did many other times, feeding them and doing some yard work. She had a rake handy, we know that, so presumably she was actually cleaning up some of the dog poop. At this point, we know that it appears that she had a pug that was attacked. Now, the official story is that the pit bulls that she'd had, some of whom she'd had for years, suddenly turned on her for no reason. But what we know is that something attacked and chewed up her pug, that she had rake in hand, and that she tried to fight. Now, in this case, witnesses did hear a commotion. So her neighbors came over, and they saw what appeared to be large dogs. And they were very confused as to what breed they were. They thought maybe they were her pit bulls, and yet no one could really identify what the breed were, but other than it was some large-headed dogs were chewing at her. So they called the sheriffs. The sheriffs come out there, and when they open the enclosure, the dogs all go running out as though something had spooked them. So no one's even sure exactly how many dogs were back there. Some say 10, some say 15, but they know that whatever was going on, everything ran out as soon as the police got there. Mary's body was found. She'd been fighting with her rake. She'd obviously put up a fight. But what's interesting is her clothes had been stripped off. And this is another case where we have a victim who all their clothes seem to have been methodically removed, which seems a strange behavior for dogs to be capable of. And we also know that because she put up a fight, one of her arms was ripped off. And again, some of her dogs returned home after this, and among the dogs that returned home, there were some pit bulls. No one analyzed their stomachs or did anything like that. They did notice some blood on several of their coats, which could, of course, have happened if there was a struggle in their pen. And so the official story was, well, her pit bulls must have turned on her, and so they put her pit bulls down when they returned home. And I'm not saying that isn't what happened. It's possible. But we have several things that are unusual. We have another one of those cases with someone who rescues dogs, breeds dogs, is familiar with dogs, has been around dogs for years. And we have their dogs get attacked by something or go missing. And then this person apparently gets in the way or tries to fight or tries to stop whatever's taking the dogs, and then is killed. And this is yet another case where the clothes are missing. Those who are fans of the Missing 411 books will recall a number of cases with strange disappearances where people turn up and they've either undressed themselves or their clothing's out of order or it's been completely removed or is nowhere to be found. So it just struck me as a couple red flags in this case, where was it really the pit bulls, or was that just the easy way out to try and explain something that was very out of the ordinary? Is that just the box that we had to put it in order for people to feel safe at night?
The fact that you said she was dismembered makes me think it wasn't a dog that had killed her.
I don't know how much damage a dog can do when it gets its mind set to it, but it seems unusual that we keep hearing these cases where not only are the clothes removed, but with arms and legs being just torn away. That seems like a lot of strength for a domestic dog. Thomas Henning is another one of these cases that we find happens around Christmas time, and I still don't know if there's any significance to that. It's just it stuck in my head, as I mentioned in the last show, that when I was a kid, I read a book about werewolves. The werewolves were active around Christmas. And Thomas Henning went missing and was found dead on December 26, 2012, the day after Christmas. And this is on the Navajo reservation. So again, we have the Native American time. This is the second of two cases where it was said that he was out sledding. Apparently he was out, it's winter, there's snow, he's out playing in the snow, he gets separated from his friends, he's out with his sled. The friends come home, he doesn't. A search result. They go out there, they find what's left of him. And unfortunately, it's another case of what's left of him. Torn apart, badly mutilated. I believe he was 8 years old, and he was the one who goes missing from a group, almost as though something was watching, waiting for him to be separated, waiting for him to be out of earshot, out of sight. No one hears anything, no one sees anything. We have a bloody mess, we have paw prints. We know the FBI was there. We know the Bureau of Indian Affairs was there. We know Fish and Wildlife was there. But all that's ever released was that this was an accidental death, and he just happened to have been torn apart by dogs. Again, one of these random packs of wild dogs that apparently range all over the countryside. In this case, I thought it was interesting that the other children that were with him, they all came back, but when he got separated, that's when something got him. And that it had to have happened, again, in a short period of time. It had to have been a relatively noiseless and sudden attack. Because no one heard anything, no one saw anything. They just figured he was coming along later with the sled. He'll be along shortly. Almost as though whoever's last in line, the slowest of the pack, gets kicked off. Betty Clark is another case where we have an elderly person who's out walking in their own neighborhood. And again, we have another case that's near Christmas. This one happened on December 21st of 2013. Betty was in her mid-70s. She was walking alone in her neighborhood. And again, we have it blamed on pit bulls. We have no witnesses. No one sees anything. And yet we have someone turns up relatively close to their own home, ripped to shreds. The neighbor's pit bulls were initially blamed, and that was what the media coverage was. In big headlines when the story broke was elderly woman killed by neighborhood pit bulls. And yet again, the pit bulls that were initially blamed, they're cleared in the case. And then no other dogs are put forward as a suspect, and the story becomes a fine print headline days later in the back of the paper. Dogs suspected in mutilation case cleared, and the media and law enforcement just seems to dismiss it, but almost as though there's no publicized follow-up investigation. Nothing happens other than we have someone torn apart on their daily routine, someone who's older, so would presumably represent less of a threat. No one sees it, no one hears it, and then we have law enforcement simply says, well, it was pit bulls or it's neighborhood dogs. We see this again and again in these cases where when people are picked off, they rely on sloppy media reporting to just generate a headline and then not follow it up, because the corrections follow days, weeks, even months later saying, no, these animals that we thought did it, they didn't do it. That gets relatively little publicity. What sticks in everyone's mind will be that, well, this is just a pit bull-related death, or this is a tragedy, but it's something we can understand. And yet, what we really need to take from these cases is that the deaths themselves are happening. We know these deaths are happening. We know people are being torn apart, and we know it's happening so suddenly and so near their houses that it would suggest that something, whatever does this, isn't afraid of humans precisely, and is willing to come in areas where there are humans, and will actually wait in neighborhoods or areas of human habitation until a good target of opportunity comes out, that it will then strike suddenly, kill, mutilate, partially devour, and then vanish. Jessica Norman is one of these interesting cases in that she was an adult woman in the prime of her life, really. She was in her 30s. She was found torn apart and killed in a pasture very near her home. It was basically what amounted to a vacant lot nearby. We know that she used drugs, and she was found with methamphetamine in her system. So I believe that this is a case of impairment. Jessica went out to this area to use drugs, and this altered her perceptions, obviously. Now, we know she'd used here before, so if something was scoping out the area, maybe it knew this was her favorite spot, or maybe it knew prey would come along. There's some indication that other people would use this vacant lot to use drugs. There's a lot that's gone to pasture, so you have tall grass, you have a certain amount of concealment. Jessica goes missing. Once the search begins, it's relatively easy to find her because they go check out thinking, well, maybe she's just using drugs, maybe she's passed out. So they find her remains in the field where she liked to use at. But the meth isn't what killed her. What killed her was apparently being torn apart. And she's found, again, stripped naked, limb from limb. At first they weren't sure, well, was this a crime? What could have happened here? I believe one of the local law enforcement officers was quoted as saying they thought it looked almost like a bear attack. It's eventually blamed on wild dogs. The wild dogs that no one hears anything, no one sees anything, and that aren't ever really spotted before or after. Yet here again, these mysterious wild dogs have torn someone apart. And I believe Jessica Norman was a victim because I don't think that whatever's doing this, these unknown canine predators, I don't think it will normally select otherwise healthy adult humans, either male or female. I think it will only do that under certain circumstances, like if they sense an impairment or if they really know to the extent, and I'm speculating as to what their mindset would be, but almost as though they have to be extra sure they can get away with it, that they won't take as many chances as they will when they grab a child.
Is that the only case in Florida like that you've turned up in your research?
In Florida, it's hard to say. I'm still separating the cases because you have a lot of what's called pit bull-related fatalities in Florida because it's a popular breed there. As we've looked at with these other cases, a lot of times the initial media coverage says pit bull case, turns out to have not been a pit bull or to not have had definitive evidence of a pit bull. So I would say if there's some cases I want to look at more in Florida that were media reported pit bull incidents that I have questions about, but that I can't definitively say that they fit the pattern or not at this point. It's something I want to look more into. Something else that I want to look at with the Florida cases, I actually used to live in South Carolina, so the same thing was taking place in South Carolina, is that you had cases where alligators were blamed in some of these cases for human mutilations or deaths, and yet you had this pattern of no witnesses or missing clothing or people going missing. And it seemed almost as though a case to blame whatever animal might be nearby to serve as the usual suspect. So I also wanted to look at in Florida whether or not certain cases said to be of alligators, whether or not there might be more to that, or whether the mutilations showed patterns that just didn't seem consistent with alligators. Because we know alligators will take people, and usually if they're doing it, they're going to drag them somewhere and want to eat on them. But if you have people that have just been torn limb from limb and we're told it's an alligator, there was cases of that I also wanted to look at. So I would put a big question mark on Florida that if there are areas where these things seem to be particularly active, I think it may be some of these southern states, and that we just don't know the full story yet. So in areas like Mississippi, South Carolina, this deep south area, and we've talked about a lot of cases in Georgia, I think all the way down there into Florida, there may be clusters of these going on, and we just don't know the full extent of it.
I can understand why the authorities would have a knee-jerk reaction and suspect an alligator was responsible for the killings in areas where alligators live, but when you look at how the people's bodies had been maimed, alligators kill and maim in a totally different way than a canid would. After any period of time, I can't understand why a coroner wouldn't instantly recognize that gators weren't responsible for these deaths. Having said that, please tell us about the Summer Sears case.
Summer Sears is yet again one of these cases where you have, in this case, a 4-year-old girl. She was staying with her grandfather. She was playing in her grandfather's backyard. Now, the official story that came out was that one or more loose dogs brutally attacked her. That sounds a little vague, doesn't it? There's a reason for that. It's because, again, no one saw anything. No one heard anything. Her grandfather was actually in the trailer. He thought she was 4 years old. He wasn't too concerned about it. He was letting her play out in the yard. This is actually another case where we have the victim so horrifically mutilated that the police chief was quoted as saying that he at first thought it was a bear attack. DNA swabs were taken, the wounds were analyzed, and the closest anyone could say was that they believed it was a canine that attacked her. Now, there had been some people who had seen loose dogs in the neighborhood, but it was never confirmed that any of these dogs had done it. No one was ever charged. Some dogs were seized, but they were cleared. No one said, oh, this dog did it, or this dog did it, or the neighbor's dog did it. It simply became, well, something grabbed this girl from her yard, something tore her apart, something killed her, something so horrifically that we at first think it's a bear that did it, some large mammal has done it. So what are we going to chalk this up as? How can we explain this? What can we call this so we can sleep at night? So it becomes a matter of saying, well, we know we saw dogs. We know dogs are a real thing. We know dogs exist. We know these wounds look kind of like that. So it must have been dogs that done it. And yet again, it's a case or play in your own yard. The adult's not there, almost as though something waits for its chance. You have an area that's only semi-rural. You have some tall grass, some trees, but you're not talking about deep woods. You're talking about suburban America. And we have a young child, what apparently makes for an easy target of opportunity, who just in the relatively small period of time when they are unsupervised is just taken and horrifically mutilated and killed, either for sport or for food. And it's one of those things that really makes you want to keep an eye on your children whenever they go play outside. It makes you want to look out the window. It makes you literally want to stand out there while your children are outside.
Oh, I'd say so. As far as the possibility of it being a bear that had killed these people, when you look at all the evidence that a bear's going to leave at a crime scene like that, I don't see how you could come to that conclusion. They're going to leave so much evidence behind that you couldn't mistake it. Please tell us about the Christopher Malone case.
Christopher Malone was 3 years old, and this happened relatively recently. This was a 2014 case. And this is yet again where we have a young child playing out in the yard. The parents' pit bulls were to blame, and this happened in Mississippi, so it's the Deep South, which is my theory that in some of these areas of the Deep South may be almost a cluster area where these things take place. And it seems as though the stories reported in the media varied. Was it really these pit bulls or not? What we know happened is that we have a young boy. His parents did own pit bulls, but he's out playing. Something grabs him. Something tears him apart. He's essentially horribly mutilated, just torn to ribbons within a matter of a short period of time, and no one hears or sees anything. The reason they blame the parents' pit bulls is because they found blood on them. I think in some of these cases, what happens either when the animal's nearby or that a sympathetic animal will simply approach and sniff or investigate. Oh, hey, here's my owner, or here's this child that pets me every day. It's laying here dead. That they'll go in and sniff or lick or otherwise have some contact with the body once it's mutilated, causing the blood transfer to the animal, that then that animal will then get the blame, even though it wasn't necessarily responsible, even if the animal had no history of attacks, and that it will lead to people skipping the step of actually autopsying the animal after they put it down to see if there's human remains actually in its stomach, that they rely on very superficial clues such as blood, that they're finding canine wounds, canine DNA, paw prints, and that if there's any nearby dog, that they can say, this is what we think did it. The dog ends up being the patsy for the case.
Yeah, when you were telling me last week about all the instances where dogs had been killed when it was clear they weren't responsible for the deaths of those people, that really didn't sit well with me. I hate the idea that that happened, but I'm not surprised. I mean, the authorities have to have some kind of a scapegoat and something or someone to blame the murders on, so I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised.
I think some of the investigators in their own mind have a way to close these cases, that they need a rational explanation. We talked about how there may be something going on at the federal level where there may be people who know that there's something not quite right going on in these cases. There may be something strange. But on a local and state level, I think that some of these investigators or conscientious police officers are doing their job, but that they need a way to sleep at night too. They need an explanation that they can wrap their mind around. And not being familiar with this pattern, not having any idea how often this kind of thing is happening, you feel bad for the dogs who were put down, but you almost sympathize with why this is happening. It becomes understandable because no one's been exposed to the pattern. No one has an idea just how much this takes place.
Oh, I agree. I definitely understand it, but that doesn't mean I have to respect it. I just hate the idea that it's been happening. There was an incident near Mexico City where 5 people were killed. Please tell us about that incident.
The cases in Mexico are interesting because they suggest that this is not just a North American phenomenon. I've heard instances of your radio program with reports of these things all over the world, and here we have them down in Mexico. Obviously, people think of Mexico, they think, well, there's crime down there, these kind of things must happen. Except here we have a park that's outside of Mexico City. It's abutting a rural area, but it's a place where couples go, kids go to make out, etc. And you have, over a period of months, 5 people showing up, either singly or in groups of 2, badly mutilated and torn to bits. Now, in Mexico, there's less trust of law enforcement than there is here in the United States. There's the old saying that in Mexico, the police have the choice between either silver or lead. Either they take the bribe or they get shot. So people tend to question whatever the police tell them. Now, in this case, almost from the beginning, people were questioning, well, is there something strange going on here? Are these murders? Why are these people turning up badly mutilated? Why is this continuing over a period of months? If it's a pack of dogs, as is the official story, well, then why hasn't someone found these dogs? Why haven't they been trapped? Why are these attacks happening? Almost why aren't these attacks happening more often? Because if the park's played with packs of wild dogs, there's people out here all the time, yet something's apparently just grabbing people. In one case, it was a mother and her young child. In another case, it was a boyfriend and girlfriend. In the other cases, it was teenage girls. In one of these attacks, where the teenage girl and her boyfriend were found ripped apart, she actually was able to get off a cell phone call to her sister and said something. The reception was apparently bad, said that they were being attacked by large dogs. Now, I don't speak Spanish, so I've not been able to read it into all the media reports, but some suggest that that's not the exact translation. What she actually said was something like strange large dogs, that there was something unusual about it, saying, please come quick, help, and then bam, the phone died, almost as though whatever was attacking her knew to knock the phone out of commission right away. And you saw that in the case with Lothar Schwederer, who'd been killed, that he'd gotten his phone out even as he was putting up a fight, but that he's disabled or incapacitated almost as soon as that phone comes into play, almost as though whatever's doing these attacks knows to stop the ability of a human to contact other humans to try to call for help, that they know this is a means that humans use for communication. And I just found it strange that she was only able to get out essentially seconds of a panicked message. And when her sister got it, she first thought that it was some kind of joke. I mean, her sister's just at the park with her boyfriend. You're not expecting that. So, but she tries to call back and immediately no answer. And then her sister's found there with her boyfriend. They're both mutilated. So you have 2 teenagers, the classic horror movie setup. They go off into the lover's lane type area to make out or spend time alone together, and then something gets them. And in Mexico, at least, we had the issue come up immediately in the local papers where people were questioning it. A lot of people thought, well, is this the cartels that's doing it? Is this a cover-up for something else? But the official story was dogs, and here we have a report of someone saying something about large, strange dogs while it happened. Yet, in general, no witnesses, and the people are being picked off when they're either alone, at the edge of the park, or somehow separated. And in Mexico, this is taking place right at the outskirts of Mexico City, one of the largest cities, certainly in North America. I think there's a population of, 25 million people? So it just goes to suggest that even the very outskirts of our urban areas aren't as safe as we'd like to think.
For whatever it was to be able to take out 5 people like that, by itself, that says everything about its ability.
Almost as though it's a serial killer, because you'll have 2 people dead 1 month, 3 people the next, and here's another one. And there was some indication that it being Mexico, that the authorities stopped publicizing how many cases were actually taking place, owing to their failure to prevent it, and that other deaths and disappearances were, of course, possibly occurring in the area. Mexico City has its crime problems, so it's almost as though what got lost in the shuffle. If we know about these, what ones don't we know about?
It sure does make you wonder. Let's talk about the Edward Cahill case.
The Edward Cahill case is interesting to me in that it harkens back to that case we talked about in New Jersey with the woman who'd bred dogs, and then her house was found shredded, almost as though what the police described as a monster had gotten inside. And I'm wondering if this isn't the beginning of a pattern of cases that I'm just noticing them. Edward Cahill, he was an adult male. He owned 2 pit bulls. He lived with his girlfriend and her son. Girlfriend and her son leave to go do errands, leaving him at home with his dog that he's had for years. When she comes home, she finds him in the living room. The living room's been shredded, torn about. It looks like there's been a war in there. He's dead. He's torn to bits. One of his 2 pit bulls is found later cowering in the back bedroom, hiding. The other pit bull, the one that eventually gets the blame for it, is laying calmly next to him. And it's got some blood on its muzzle, and it's got blood splatters on its coat. So to the investigators, this is an open and shut case. They say, oh, well, his dog must have turned on him. It must have got angry at him. And these things just happen. Does it just happen? Because here's his dog. He's had it for years. It never decided to eat him before. It never really hurt him before. It's his dog. He's friendly with it. Nothing was unusual about this day except the fact that he was suddenly alone. And he had these large dogs in his house. Now, we know that whatever does some of these attacks seems to prey on large domestic dogs. So this case stuck in my mind, and this is one of the things that I want to look more at as to whether or not this is another pattern of people who we are told are killed by their own pet dogs, yet it's happening when they're alone, when the place will be just torn apart, and if it's just suggested that it was the dog because it's a usual suspect sort of deal. Now, no one ever analyzed the dog's stomach to see if parts of the guy were in it, see if it actually had blood in its mouth. All we know is that it had blood in its muzzle, which could have very easily happened if after its owner's killed, if it licks it, and that it had blood on its coat, but it was laying there near his body almost as if it was trying to protect him, even though he'd been so badly mutilated. So it seemed to me just a strange case, that it's something that just kind of raised some alarm bells in my mind as to whether this is yet another pattern that no one's noticed because no one's really looked at it or tried to think outside the box. It's a case where we know these deaths are happening, so we have to ask ourselves, well, are there really this many cases where people's dogs that they've had for years just suddenly turn on them for no apparent reason, or are people occasionally being killed in their own home with the house being ransacked, violently destroyed, and the dog, if it happens to be there, is just taking the blame because no one knows what else to say? Do we want to say an unknown predator finds its way into people's houses, rips them to shreds? Do we want people thinking about that? Or do we want everyone to sleep better at night? So we just say, oh, well, dogs sometimes must turn on people. But I don't know. It's just something that raised questions in my head as to what really may have happened here, especially because it happened during a very brief window of about 2 hours when his girlfriend and her son were gone and he was alone in the house. So it just seemed that there were some coincidences involved. And the other thing that stuck out in this case was that it happened on Christmas Day. That's, again, that bit of folklore that stuck in my head, that quote-unquote werewolves, which would be how people would describe these canine predators in the past, were active around Christmas time. So that this happened on Christmas Day, happened when he was alone for just a few hours. The dogs had not been a problem with him before. It just raised some alarm bells in my head. Is this another pattern that's going unrecognized of attacks?
When you're researching this case, did you turn up any info on whether or not his house was ransacked and looked like a monster had been set loose in the house, the way you mentioned with that other case last week?
Well, one of his 2 dogs was in the bedroom. That door was closed. And then he and the other dog were found in the living room, which did look as though there'd been some sort of struggle taking place. You had furniture knocked over. You had broken items. It basically looked like he'd fought. That's interesting, too, because there's the mention of the blood on the dog, but the dog itself that takes the blame didn't seem to be wounded. And here you had a muscular, strong young man. You would think that if his living room's torn to shreds from fighting whatever got to him, that if it was his dog that got to him, why isn't the dog bruised? Why isn't the dog injured? He obviously went down swinging, so why isn't the dog hurt? Why is it just laying there quietly, almost protective of its dead master? And that was another thing that bothered me about this case. Almost suggesting that something gets in, perhaps going after the human, perhaps going after these dogs as prey, that the homeowner will resist, put up a heck of a good fight, but still fail. It makes you wonder just how safe you are, even in your own house. We know these deaths occurred. Someone can say, well, maybe it wasn't that mysterious after all, or they could question my line of reasoning, but they can't say these deaths didn't occur. They can't say that the place was ransacked. They can't say that it didn't happen on Christmas Day. There's just these odd things that stick in your mind.
Yeah, they're definitely pretty odd. For all of you listening, in the pre-interview, Christopher was telling me that not only has he put a lot of research into cases like the ones that you heard on tonight's show and on last week's show, he's also put a lot of research into cases that involved hunters being killed by an unknown canine predator. He also told me in that same conversation he'd be happy to come back and do a show on that once he had a chance to get his notes together on that subject. Christopher, I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to having you back to do that show. Could you give us a preface on it?
Yes. Some of this comes up again in the Missing 411 books, but I think David Paulides wasn't looking at the pattern that we're going to find here. There seems to be cases, particularly of bow hunters, hunters who don't have firearms. Either they are found mutilated in the woods after hunting, or they are found dead under mysterious circumstances without a cause of death being released, or they simply go out hunting one day and are never seen again. And I think there's an entire subcase of hunters, mostly bow hunters, a few firearms hunters, who, if we look at it, are being found mutilated, dead, or just going missing, that we will find match somewhat our pattern that we've talked about here, with either clothes missing, or it's being said to be dogs, or in some cases it's just covered up completely.
I see. Well, I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to doing that show with you.
I'm happy to get the information out there.
Well, you know it's appreciated. Like I said before, once you have your notes together on that and you're ready to go, please do let me know. Well, it's about time to wrap this show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
I think that if there's something I'd like people to come away from this with, it's the idea that these things aren't killing people isn't true, that they are dangerous, that at least some of these deaths are probably caused by what people are referring to dogman or werewolves, or I like to think of it as an unknown canine predator. And that I think a certain amount of wariness might be in order. It's happening more than we've realized. It's certainly happening, and it's getting labeled as other things. The victims are often the most vulnerable members of society, especially our children. I think I would just encourage a certain amount of wariness. If nothing else, since we know that there are children being taken from their own yards and killed by something, I would just stress, keep an eye out on your kids. Just don't take for granted that you're safe, as you might have thought. There are predators out there, that there are monsters that are real, and to just try and be prepared. And I would also suggest that if, God forbid, you are attacked, that maybe the best thing to do is put up a fight. We know several cases where apparently the attackers were driven off by men with clubs. We know cases where people fought and were killed, but some cases where it almost seems like juveniles of the predators were responsible for the attacks where they could be driven off. So I would simply suggest that if someone is set upon, that maybe putting up a fight is the best way to deal with it. At least make them work for it if they're going to take you. And that may seem morbid, but that's about the only solace I can take from reading about again and again where these people are being taken. I do have an email address I set up, so this is ongoing research for me, which I simply set up as dogmanevents@gmail.com. And if anyone wants to write me with any comments or to tell me of other cases that I missed or how they followed up on these patterns or just their opinion, I'm happy to hear from them. I don't do this full time. I don't take any money from it. I don't make any money off this at all. So if anyone out there has anything they want to contact me or ask any questions, I just say, feel free to drop me an email, and I'll just respond as best I can as time allows.
Well, thanks so much for spending time with us, Christopher, and sharing those stories. I really do appreciate it. And like I said earlier, once you have those notes ready, please do let me know so we can do that follow-up show.
As soon as I get the presentation together, and I've got quite a number of cases that we can go through in a manner similar to how we've discussed these other attacks. I think that listeners may find it interesting information. Certainly something to keep in mind next time they go in the woods.
Oh, I'm sure they will find it interesting. That sounds really good to me. Well, have yourself a great night.
Thanks, Vic. I hope everyone out there can stay safe.
Oh, I hope so too. We'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we get started, if you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Damien. Damien, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vic.
Thanks for being here.
It's an honor. It's a great show. I enjoy it on a weekly basis, so it's great to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to doing this interview with you. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, not too far from the city of Manhattan, or I guess the island of Manhattan, and mostly New Jersey, in New York and New Jersey. Spent a lot of time in upstate New York and western New Jersey. My dad and my grandfather were both fishermen, so we hit many of the lakes from, the Catskills all the way up to northern Hudson area and down to southern New Jersey. Had a great upbringing, loved the city life as well as the outdoors. I'm a big baseball fan, always enjoyed that, and I spent a lot of my youth trying to figure out how I could become Han Solo. I would say Star Wars was probably my favorite thing out of my youth. But there was another movie that sort of changed my life a bit. That was The Omen, which came out in, I believe it was 76 or 77, just a few years after I was born. And it affected me a lot. So a lot of the things that I've learned about paranormal and that, it actually originated from my naming.
I can only imagine, since that movie did come out just a few years after you were born, what kind of effect that would have had on you. Kids being as cruel as they are, that had to be awfully hard.
I got picked on quite a bit. A lot of the, your dad is Satan, and which I found it funny as I got older. When I was about 4, 5, and 6, I think it was really hard. As I started to become a little bit more self-aware, not that 7 and 8 is an age to be very self-aware, but as I got a little older, I remember an instance where the schoolmate just wouldn't let it go. He kept telling me that Satan was my father, and finally one day I just turned to him and I said, you know what, you're right, and he's going to come for you tonight. And he just looked at me, sort of like odd and shocked that I would say something like that. And the next day at school, I got called into the office because the boy stayed up all night. I think I mentioned something about when you fall asleep, my father's going to steal your soul. And so he finally went into his mom and dad's room early in the morning and I guess was crying to them, and they came in. And so I got in trouble for him teasing me because I finally stood up to him. But I always thought it was funny that I got the bully back by telling him that, yes, my father was Satan and he's going to steal your soul tonight. And the kid couldn't go to sleep, and he cried himself into his parents' room. So.
Well, at least he left you alone after that, huh?
He did, for about a year. But then he forgot about my father and decided to come back after me. But it's all right. We live and we learn.
I'd say so. Because of the experiences you had, because of your name like you just mentioned, as a kid, were you fascinated by monsters and things like that went bump in the night, or did that kind of put you off because of that experience you had due to your name?
I think it made me very curious. I grew up, I think a lot of us who grew up in the 70s, we grew up with The Omen. We grew up with, what was Linda Blair's movie?
The Exorcist.
Yeah, The Exorcist. We grew up with Cujo, and, you know, it was at a time when horror movies were, I think it was one of those times when horror movies were really big, and Jaws was a big film. I remember seeing Jaws and not wanting to go swimming for about a year. And yeah, I think it made me curious. I think a lot of people, a lot of my friends were curious at that time because, you know, a lot of these movies, these books, the things we'd read would start with, this is based on a true story. And part of you wanted to know, is it really based on a true story? Is that really true? Can it happen? Is it real? When your name is Damien, like I was saying, I got teased quite a bit. But I was very curious. I was curious to know, is there any truth to it? Is there a son of Satan? You know, what does that entail? I read the Bible. I read excerpts about the Bible, about Satanism, about, you know, Satan's Bible and all these different things. And it didn't necessarily guide me religiously, but, you know, I was very curious. I did a lot of research as a young man, and as I got into my teens, I was really into it for a while. I don't know if you'll remember this. There was a writer, her name was Anne Rice. She did a novel series on vampires. I got big into that as a teenager. And so, yeah, I think it really did influence me towards wanting to understand, and when I was younger, wanting to experience something supernatural. Today, I wouldn't want that at all. But back then, I was very curious. I wanted to not just know, to not just have knowledge, but I wanted to have experiences. I wanted to actually have something happen.
Speaking of all the research you did, how much research did you do on dogmen after you had that experience?
I didn't do anything at first. I didn't really know how to deal with it. I think I just shut it out. I just pushed it away. I went home and hugged my kid. I was really freaked out. I mean, even now, and I've heard other people who tell their stories, it's amazing when you recap it, you talk about it, it comes back. And there's something about that fear that's different. I was in a really bad car accident as a teenager, and I was afraid for my life. I had a bad injury, and the doctors didn't know how to fix me. And I remember what it was like to be afraid that this could be it for me at the age of 18. I compare that fear to what I felt that day in the woods, and they're just totally different. It's just a very different experience. One was very primal. It was in the gut. It's like when you go up to a girl and you're nervous and you get the butterflies and your stomach sort of swirls around and you can't control it. There's no reasoning with that feeling, you know, when you're afraid. This was like a million times worse than that. There was no talking it down. You know, when I was in the hospital and I was, you know, after the car accident, I could reason with what was happening and sort of talk my way through it and reason that there's a good chance I'll be okay. This other thing, I haven't been to the woods since, so that should tell you right there the impact it had.
It's easy to listen to these encounters on the show and think that you'd handle the encounter one way, but until you go through it, you never will really know how you would respond.
You don't know what you're dealing with. I think we all have had situations in our lives where circumstances were such that we couldn't necessarily control them. But this is different. It's a scary thing. It's a real-life horror movie. Come to the woods near you. I mean, it's not a fun experience. And I kid. That's how I deal with stuff. I try to joke. But I used to go fishing every week, and I haven't been since. I used to go hiking all the time, and I haven't been since. And yet, at the same time, I have not told many people. I have not shared this story. I have not really wanted to talk about it until recently. I pushed it away. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't even know where to put it, how to register it. What was it? Was it just me? Except there was nothing in my life that could have, I don't know, usually you'd have something maybe something had happened to you, and then you have another experience, and then you're in a state of fear, and so then maybe you could reason that, okay, there was nothing. I've just been really stressed, but I was at a really good point in my life. I was actually in a very good place. So to have something very negative come into my life at a time when everything was very positive, yeah, it was not a good thing, not a good time.
Well, I'm convinced there is no such thing as a good time in your life to have a dogman encounter. There really is no good time, in my opinion.
Well, I used to feel really good about the fact that I live in the city until I started listening to your show, Vic. So thank you for taking away the last morsel of safety that I found, because some of the people and some of the research I've done recently that says that people are citing the creatures inside city limits. That's mind-boggling. That's scary.
As if this whole topic isn't unnerving enough, yeah, the idea that you can be in the city and still have an encounter, that's just too much right there. People do see them going into abandoned buildings in the night, crawling through open windows or whatnot. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
When you hear about the stories where people have been approached by dogmen or been harassed, is probably a better term, around their homes or even in their homes, to me that's the most frightening thing a person can experience, is an encounter, a negative encounter in your home, because that's where we go to be safe. That's where we go to relieve our stress and to be with our family and to decompress and feel better about things. So, you hear stories about people being robbed at gunpoint, or I've heard stories of women raped in the home and how difficult it is to get over that. Now, imagine if it's something that you don't recognize as being of this world. How do you process that? What do you do with that? I don't know how you would process that. You've talked to more people than I have, so maybe somebody you've spoken to has had an experience similar to that and was able to tell you how they were able to deal with it.
Well, one of the problems with this whole thing is whenever we've watched movies that had werewolves in them, that preconditions us to fear something that looks that way. So that just makes having an encounter with one of these things that much worse than it would have been already. So that just makes it even harder to get over. Let's get into this experience you had. In 2009, you had an experience in the Ashley National Forest. Please tell us about that.
Is it okay if I first tell you a story that happened earlier in my life?
Please do.
Okay, all right. I'll sort of tie these together and why I'm telling you. So, as a young man, I went to a private school, and one of the privileges of being in that private school was every year we went on a class trip, and that class trip lasted a week. And in one year, we actually went to a farm in upstate New York. Each day, we got up at the crack of, I think it was 4 a.m., crack of dawn. I don't even think it was dawn. I think it was a good 2 hours before dawn. And I don't remember ever smelling anything that bad before in my life, but working on that farm. And we would get up real early, and each day we would go downstairs, we'd eat breakfast, the whole group of us, and then we'd go, and they had a chalkboard where they'd put your name, and then you'd find out, what your chores were for that day, and you would go with your group and head over to whatever part of the farm. And it was really fun. We had a great week. other than the smell, which I don't think I'll ever forget. It was fun. For leisure time, we would get a few hours in the afternoon, and we would go out and play tag or manhunt or freeze tag. And one day, we were out, and part of goofing off and having fun would be scaring each other and chasing each other. And one of the boys, I'm not going to use his name, I'll just call him Joey, because he didn't want me to use his name in telling his story. So anyway, Joey had gotten sort of ahead of us, and we were just hiking sort of in a circle, and we're going to find our way back. I believe the area where the horses were was where we were going to come back out. And he came running, and we heard him, didn't see him. He was screaming, so we ran to find out what was going on, and at first we just figured someone was probably chasing him and trying to tag him, but I don't know, there's a difference between the scream of fun play and the scream of someone who's afraid. And it sounded more towards, wow, he's really spooked. So we ran after him to try to find out what was going on, and I think a couple of the girls ran towards the farm to find a teacher. We found him. He had actually ran into a tree at full speed. He was so freaked out by something he saw, which he said was a wolf. And, of course, we teased this poor kid. I don't think we ever stopped. I think we relentlessly teased him for years. And he was scared of something so bad, he ran himself into a tree, had a huge lump on his head. He had knocked himself silly. We actually found him wrapped around the tree, sitting on the ground with his legs wrapped around the tree and his arms. He was hugging the tree. I would say this tree was probably a good 8 to 10 inches thick. So it wasn't the biggest tree in the world, but it wasn't the smallest tree either. And we tried to find out what happened. There was a wolf. It was after me. We were kind of laughing at him because there aren't any wolves. We figured probably one of the dogs from the farm was out there running around doing its thing, and we figured, you just got scared. And he's like, no, it was a wolf. We all just dismissed it as Joey being Joey, and that was that. Years later, when I had my experience, I would come to think about Joey's tale and what he went through that day and how he was really spooked. In fact, when I tried to reach out to him before coming on the show to find out what it was that he saw that day, he did not want to talk to me about it. And I don't know if that's because he's still spooked or he just doesn't want to talk about it and doesn't feel that it's worth discussing. But I found it interesting that even now, this many years later, he didn't want to talk about it. A simple running in the woods, hey, remember that time you ran into the tree? And he just shut it down. He just said, no, we're not going to go there. So I can understand that. So if he saw something similar to what I saw, then I can understand why he shut it down. Maybe he doesn't want to talk about it. And then, Vic, I don't know where you grew up. I grew up in an area that was primarily a Catholic area, and it was an upper middle class sort of place. So, telling ghost stories was something you did as a kid and as a teenager, but it wasn't something you did in society. People would look at you funny, and people have had their reputations hurt for a lot less. And I think a lot more people have experiences like this than ever talk about it. I think when you hear hundreds or maybe even thousands of people a year coming forward and saying, hey, I saw something, whether it's a Bigfoot or a dogman, I think there's probably 3, 4, 5 times that amount of people who are not coming forward, who refuse to. Whether it's because they don't want to be hassled, whether it's because they don't want their reputation tarnished, or whatever their reasons might be. I think there's a lot of people out there who've probably seen things who just aren't going to come forward and say anything. They're just not going to give us the opportunity to hear their stories. I guess the closest that I've come to going in the woods, my daughter and my son wanted to do a camp out. It's not really the woods. It's in Park City, Utah. I don't know if you're familiar with Park City, but it's sort of a resort town that's situated just above, about 35 minutes outside of Salt Lake. And it's a ski resort area. And not too far from there, they have like the YMCA camp. I guess technically it would be the woods, but it's really close to town. Everything sort of, the trees are bulldozed down. It's a wide open space. You drive in, you drive right up to your lodge, so you don't have to go to 10th. You back up, you open your trunk, you're about 15 feet away, you walk your stuff into the cabin, and then you go park your car about 50 feet away. I was nervous doing that. That's the only thing I think I've done near the woods since 2009.
Well, see, that's the thing. When someone has an encounter like you did, it's pretty common for them to second guess if they're responding to it in the right way. Well, there is no right or wrong way to respond and react to an encounter. You just respond in the best way you know how, and that's always going to be the right way. Having said that, let's get into that encounter that you had now. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Just before I get into the story, I thought I'd throw this out because I find it just hilarious. Following up on your statement, the Bigfoot guys making fun of guys who reported dogmen was probably one of the funniest things that I've come across in the last year. As I've been researching more and more about this, that some of the Bigfoot guys think it's ridiculous that there could be a dogman out there, which I found to be probably the most ridiculous thing that I've encountered thus far. And the reason why I say that is, one of the reasons why I haven't shared my story is because I'm really afraid of what people think. And I'm okay with that. I'm not a person who generally cares what people think. I'm pretty self-confident. But this is something that it changed me. It was 2009. I had just gotten a position at a new company, and my family and I were prepping to move out of state, and we were staying with family for a month as we got ready, and they lived up in the Park City area. And one of the things that I was so happy about was being up there. I was going to have some time to go fishing because I didn't have any work, and my wife and my daughter were out a lot of the time playing with the neighbor girl and her friend, so they were always off doing whatever, and gave me a lot of time to go out and check out a lot of the lakes that I hadn't had a chance to fish at. I had purchased one of the passes. You can get I don't know if they're regional or national, but you can get those national park passes that allow you to go to all the forests and all the national parks. And I went and bought one of those so I could just basically drive into any national park with my rod and reel and go enjoy myself. I was buying tackle one day, and a local gentleman, I asked him, I said, well, I've hit this area and this area, I've hit this river. I had a lot of fun on the Provo River in Utah. It was a blast. I actually caught my largest trout ever. I think it was 22.5-inch rainbow trout. I was proud of that one. So I was looking for somewhere new, and he suggested that I there's a highway, I think it's 150, that leads out of Camas, Utah, and it leads back into the Ashley Forest there. He gave me directions, and I went ahead, and the next day I got up, and I went down, and I went to check it out. And the first time that I found the lake, it was a small man-made lake. I'd say you could probably walk around this lake in about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, as you traveled on a pretty rough dirt road that took you from one camping site area to another. In between was this lake, and it was on the east side of the road. As you pulled up to the lake, which was actually on the north end of the lake, you could pull in, and I guess they had a sort of a natural boat ramp there. You could back your boat down in if you wanted to, or park your car in that area. There was room for probably about, I'd say, 6 to 8 cars. Or you could just park right on the side of the road. There wasn't obviously much traffic or anything, and the road was wide enough that trucks were coming by once in a while, pulling those 4-wheeler carts. So it was a good space. That day I went ahead and parked in a little parking area. I noticed the gentleman was already out there. He had, I think, 2 little ones with him, and I made my way around the west side. So if you could imagine this lake north to south, it ran long north to south, and east to west it was thin, and north to south it was long. So it was, in a sense, a big oval. I made my way down past the gentleman. We spoke for a few minutes. I asked him how he was doing. He showed me his catch. He had caught several fish, and I'm assuming they stocked this lake because obviously it wasn't very big, and there's no natural spring, no natural river, and he was using a little spinner bait. So I copied, and I I think I was there for about an hour and a half. It was already kind of late in the day. I don't know if you fish, Vic, but usually you want to get there in the morning before sunrise, enjoy that magic time, and then at night it's the same way. But as the sun starts to rise and it starts to get hot, a lot of the fishing isn't as good, unless you're really good, unless you're like those guys on ESPN2 who go out there and catch 10-pound bass with a piece of corn. But anyway, so I copied what he was doing, and I had no luck. And so I decided, I'm going to come back. I'll come back early. I'll go to the store tonight and get some spinners. I didn't really have many. I don't think I had a couple at the time. So I thought I'd get a couple others and try my luck the next day. And I went down there the next day, and I got there fairly early, and no one was there when I got there. It was dark. I parked in the parking area. So on the west side, there were a bunch of rocks, some large boulders, and he was fishing off one of them. I actually went and stole his spot. So I was happy he didn't show up. That would have been maybe rude because he's a local guy, but I went and stole his spot and figured if he could catch 6 or 7 lake trout, I could too. So I started casting, and no luck. And I was getting kind of frustrated. I wanted to win, but I don't get spooked too easily. Well, I used to not get spooked very easily. This area was just sort of, I don't know, it was just in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't very familiar with the area, and it was enough to spook me a little bit. I decided that I was going to go, but I wasn't going to be conquered. I was going to go and get my brother, bring him back. And that's what I did. A couple days later, I convinced my brother, who would probably prefer playing video games to ever doing an activity outside of the house. But I convinced him to go with me. I said, come on, come with me. And he didn't know why. I was like, please, just come with me. And finally, he relented. He agreed to give up 3 or 4 hours of video game play to actually go breathe some natural air. So the non-stale air. We got down there real early, probably about 6:30 in the morning. I think it was a joy just watching him struggle. I bought him a bunch of live bait, so I gave him some worms and some of that cheese bait. Really easy stuff that you give to the kids, and he still struggled with it. It was fun. Fun to watch, and very uncoordinated. And he gave up fishing after about 20 minutes, and he was just wandering around. So about 20 minutes went by, and he had made his way down around the southern area of the lake onto the east side of the lake. And I had not gone over there. It looked kind of muddy. I hadn't ventured over there at all. I stayed by the rocks on the west side. And he started calling to me. He said, hey, come down here. And I was like, okay, what? He said, no, come here, come here. He was like really excited about something. So I went down and ran down there. And I got down. And at this point, the sun was up. It was nice day. If I can remember, at this point, just as the sun was rising, you could see it was going to be blue skies. And I got down there, and here were these tracks. And they were huge. I'm not a hunter, so I can't necessarily just look at a track and tell you what it is. But I know enough that I had never seen tracks like these, and I didn't understand because they had claws. And I'm looking at them, and I'm going, well, that is a huge mountain lion, because that's the first thing that came to my head was it's got to be a mountain lion. And these tracks were so big that I could stick my foot in the track, and there was space. I am 5'6". I wear about a 9 shoe, but still, I don't know too many mountain lions that wear a size 9 shoe. So I was like, wow, these are huge. So meanwhile, we noticed that next to them were the tracks of a deer. And I say deer because I've seen the difference between deer and elk. When you're out here, elk are pretty big, and this didn't look too big. So it was either, I guess, a young elk, a female elk, or a deer. We started following them, and then something happened that I had never experienced before, ever. It got quiet. I mean, I laughed, but it was unnerving. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like this. I think maybe you said you had once or twice. It got weird quiet. The crickets, the gnats, like all the bugs stopped moving. What on earth could get bugs to stop making noise? I can understand birds stop singing, but bugs? I look at my brother, he looks at me, and he looks white. I'm like, what? And he's like, I don't want to be here. Meanwhile, like, I feel it, I sense it, but these tracks are crazy. Like, I've never seen anything like them. My phone was in the car. To be honest, actually, Vic, I don't even know, like, photos weren't even really what came to my head at that moment. You would think, in this day and age, with technology as it is, the first thing that would come to your head, especially with someone like, I have a background in film and TV, that's what would come to your head is, go get your camera, take a picture. I didn't have a very good phone at the time. I had one of those flip phones, so it didn't have a very good camera. But that's, you would think that's what comes to your head. Not really. I was really spooked, and at the same time really fascinated by these huge paw marks with the claws. And I'm trying to figure out the gait of this thing, because it looked weird. It looked funny. Normally, you would see 4 paw prints, and I couldn't make out exactly how this thing walked. I was looking for what I thought it was. It was a mountain lion. It was a really big mountain lion. And I figured the mountain lion was nearby because everything got super quiet, and we were spooked, and we were kind of unnerved. And then the oddest thing happened. Talk about breaking the ice. I guess in a sense God broke the ice that day. Out of nowhere, it started to thunder, and it got dark, and this monsoon came in, and it just ripped through, and I would say no more than 5 minutes. I mean, it just poured, and my brother just ran. He dropped his pole. He dropped everything. He went right up to the car. I was sort of left down there in between wanting to run for my life and not get eaten by the gigantic mountain lion, or go and look at these paw prints, because they followed the deer, and then as the deer turned into the woods, so did the prints. And if I could better explain it so you could understand how big and deep these prints went, the deer and this animal had walked right on the edge of the water and the land, so it was all mud. And so the prints were that much bigger because they had pushed into the mud. I'd seen a bear print, I think, once or twice, and these were bigger than those, were about the same size. They were huge. They were gigantic. And the claws, that was the thing I was trying to remember in my head. When do mountain lions take out their claws? Do they walk with their claws out? Do they take them out when they attack? I was trying to figure that out. But as you follow the prints, the claws were out for too long. I think if it had been an animal with retractable claws, I don't think there would have been claws the whole time, because it went on for a good 30, 40, 50 feet, where it just kept going on and the claws were there the whole time. I was sort of stuck. In one way, I was really happy that the monsoon had sort of blown through. It took me out of that trance. My brother's up in the car now. I've got all my gear all over. He'd been sort of playing with stuff and left it all sitting around, so I started gathering stuff up. And then it happened, or maybe it never stopped happening, but I noticed it again. It was just really eerie. It was quiet. It was so quiet. I mean, it just rained, and the only thing I could hear was some drip, drop of water. And again, it's a weird feeling. Like, it's one thing to have animals stop making noise, but bugs? You've been in the forest. There's a sound to the forest. It's amazing how loud the forest is. If you're really a techie nerd, like some of us are, you can actually measure the sound of the forest, and it's loud. People don't realize how loud the forest is. So when it goes quiet, it is noticeable. It is severe. And I so wanted to follow the tracks. I wanted to see where they went. But I was so freaked out. And my brother was up in the car. He had left me there. And he had even gone as far as he took the keys, he turned the car on, he was sitting in there. I'm gathering up the gear, and suddenly I start to feel like I need to hurry. I suddenly had this feeling like, come on, get out of here. It's time to go. It's time to go, and we're not going to come back. I'm furiously trying to gather everything up, and that day, we had not parked down at the northern end like I had done when I had come alone. We had parked on the road. And so the way back to the car was actually up a small hill that went through some trees, and it wasn't very thick, so you could see the car from the lake. The lake was only maybe, a stone's throw from the road. You're talking, 50 feet, so not very far, maybe 100 feet from the road down the hill to the lake. I remember grabbing a bunch of stuff, and I started to run like a little kid. And I remember that feeling, like, when you're spooked and you're a little kid. I remember as a kid talk about werewolves and werewolf movies. I saw American Werewolf in London. That movie freaked me out. I'll never forget it. The friend coming to him in the hospital with the little Mickey Mouse doll. David! And he's all ripped up and torn to shreds, and he's telling him that you're going to become a monster and eat people. And I remember that was a big deal in movies, and I'm a huge movie buff. I love film. And at that time, the special effects, it was a really big deal, the special effects that went into American Werewolf in London, because they actually showed the transformation of David turning into the werewolf. So when I think of werewolves, in a sense, that's kind of one of the things that I look back to. I think I saw The Howling once or twice. If you were to ask me to draw one or to think of one, that's probably where I would go with it. Although now I'd probably go with yours. You have those big black dogmen on your videos. Those are kind of unnerving. I'm struggling up the hill. I'm fumbling. I'm falling all over myself. At some point, I'm a logical person. I grew up, even though I was really into supernatural things, even though I really wanted stuff to happen, nothing ever really happened. I had a couple of experiences in my life that were different, and I can't necessarily explain what happened, but for the most part, I'm a pretty straightforward, logical person who listens to reason and believes in facts and science. And when something like this happens, sometimes, I don't know, maybe because of that, it's hard for me to process it. And so I started laughing because I felt like a little kid who was really spooked after seeing Jaws or one of these horror movies or American Werewolf in London. Of course, at this moment, the last thing in my mind, I'm thinking, not even Bigfoot is in my mind. I'm thinking there's a really big cat out there, and I probably was looking up in the trees. I can't remember that detailed, but, I've heard that they jump on you. So I probably was looking up in the trees, and I'm fumbling, and I finally got to the car, and I got the first couple of rods in and some of the equipment, and I realized that I had left one of my rods down by the rocks. It was mine and my tackle box. I realized I had to go back down there to get it. And I apologize, Vic. Sometimes it's hard to remember all the details exactly the way it happened. At this point, because I can't remember exactly what I left down there. I know one of them was a pole and something else, and I ran down to get it, and I grabbed it. And I remember because it was more than just a pole, because I had to sort of grab more than one thing. I was sort of grabbing it, and I was fumbling again, trying to get up the hill, and I had like a moment, a feeling, and I turned around, and across on the east side of this lake, I saw something, and I couldn't make out what it was. I stared, and it was like a shadow. But it was the biggest shadow I've ever seen outside of a zoo in my life. And it noticed me, the best that I don't even know how to explain this. It stepped, whatever it was, it stepped back into the woods, into the darkness. And I lost it. I mean, I just threw everything in the car. I don't even, usually when you have hooks and on your line, you take care with how you put things away. And that did not happen that day. I was dumbfounded as to what I had just experienced, what I had seen. I had no idea what I had seen. It didn't make any sense to me. It was very big. It was very tall. It had a huge head. I couldn't make it out real well. It was like an outline. It was a shadow. It was something there. It moved. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't the leaves. I know the difference between, it was a body, I could tell, and it stepped backwards out of where I could see it, as if it knew by stepping back to where it went that I would no longer be able to really make out what it was. And I thought to myself, is it a bear? But bears don't stand like that. They don't step like that. I've never seen a bear gracefully step backwards. I have never known or heard of a bear that was smart enough to know if it steps backwards that it would be in a darker area, or even to know that I had noticed it in that way. This thing knew I had stopped, I had scanned, and I had stopped right on it with my eyes. It knew it, I knew it, and it scared the living bleepity bleep out of me. I got in the car, I drove way too fast out of there, and I had a sedan, a small sedan, and it was not the road you want to be driving like that, but I didn't care, and I got out of there. My brother wouldn't talk about it. On the way home, I had said to him, did you see anything when you were down there? Did you see anything? Because I remember at one point he looked like ashen, and he ran for his life, and this is a guy who, if you'd see him at this point in his life, he was a jelly donut, my friend. He was a tubby, flubby guy, and he zipped up out of that area. I'd never seen him move that fast, and I didn't even know he could. And on the way home, I said, did you see anything? And he wouldn't talk to me. In fact, has never spoken to me about it. So I don't know if he saw something. I don't know if he just felt presence. I don't count him as one of the people that I told because he was there. And I remember, it's amazing how hindsight is 20/20. I don't know if it would have been a good idea to run down there with my phone. I don't know. The phone, I've thought about it since we first spoke, trying to remember exactly why did I leave the phone in the car. It wasn't a very good phone. Could I have even taken photos with it? Why didn't I go get it? But that's not what goes through your head when the forest stops speaking. It's fear. It's primal fear. It's like nothing else. Nothing compares to it. I've seen some scary movies since then. Nothing compares to it. I've had some scary moments in my life. This was something deep inside that just, it's there. I've heard some people talk about how they think, maybe this is something that is inside us from eons ago when we used to get chased by things that wanted to eat us. The interesting thing, though, Vic, is that I didn't think about it very much for years. I shut the whole thing out, but I also shut out fishing. And I moved across the country. It wasn't like I stayed there. I moved 2,500 miles away. And I still couldn't go into the woods. Forget going alone. When my daughter would say, you want to go hiking? I always had an excuse. Boy, no. Daddy's foot hurts today. No, my back hurts. I had a lot of excuses. Had a lot of headaches. But it changed me. I wouldn't necessarily say for the better. I wouldn't necessarily say for the worst. It just changed me on a primal level. I listen to people who, on your show and other shows, who say they've seen things and then they want to run back out there and go and shake hands with it and take photos. I didn't even have half the experience some of these people have had, and I'm telling you, I can't do it. I can't bring myself. Like I told you, we went to that YMCA camp, which is right next to town, and I would not let my kids out of my sight. I practically held hands with them the whole weekend. And my daughter goes up there every summer. She goes up for girls' camp. I don't know if you know much about girls' camp, but the girls have a fun week, and then you come up at the end of the week and they get little medals, what they were good at, responsibility or trustworthiness or honesty, and they have a big ceremony, and that's too much of the woods for me right there. Yeah, my girlfriend recently said, hey, we bought all that fishing stuff last year and got you a fishing license. When are we going to go? Man, she's one of the 3 people I've actually told. I've only told my mother, her, and one other person. I told you. In fact, up until today, Vic, I've actually now told 4 people, including you. So up until today, you were the 3rd person. And today I told my daughter. She's still pretty little. She's only 10, but I told her I was going to be on a radio show. And I hadn't decided yet if I wanted her to listen to it or not. I told her a very, very brief, not very descriptive, not very emotional story. I just said, yeah, Daddy saw something in the woods once that really scared him. That's why I don't like to go in the woods. And a really nice man who has a really good show about it is going to call me tonight, and we're going to talk about it. So I probably won't let her listen to the show now I think about it. But 4 people in 7 years.
You said your daughter's only 10, but how did she react to that news?
My daughter's still at that age where they look at you like you're a superhero. And I didn't want her to necessarily be afraid. I don't want her to have the fear that I have, but at the same time, she knows that I know about these things from researching it and such, because I am so protective of her when she goes up to camp. I drill it into her that when you go anywhere, you go with a partner. You never go alone. I don't care if it's to go to the bathroom and it's only 20 feet away. You go with someone. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Garrett Bardsley. Garrett is a young boy, I believe he was 12 years old, who was out in the Uintas with his dad and the Boy Scout troop that he was a member of. Him and his dad were fishing, and he stepped into the water by mistake, and he told his dad, hey, I'm going to go and change my socks and shoes, and I'll be back. And he headed over to the campsite, which from what I've been told and what I've read, wasn't very far. Probably very similar to the YMCA setup that I described that my daughter goes to. And he disappeared, and all they found was a sock. And they've never found anything else. And so my son and my daughter, my son's real little, he's only 6, so he doesn't listen to me as much, so he doesn't get to go to camp. Not after what his dad has experienced, but my daughter, and trust me, it's the worst week of the year, Vic. When she goes to camp, it is the worst week of the year for me because I freak out the whole week. Last year, my girlfriend was like, you really got to chill out. I'm like, I can't chill out. I can't. I saw something that was about 8-9 feet tall, had the head of like a golf cart. I mean, this thing was gigantic, and now I've done the research, and I've heard other people's stories, and I've heard about how these things can move and how easily they're able to surround people, get in front of people, get behind people, do whatever they want. I mean, this is their realm. You know, if you put on top of that, if you do some of the research and you even hear some of the Bigfoot stories, those can be just as scary. You know, anybody who says that they want to go out and go flower picking with one of these things, I think is crazy. Because I think just like any other being in the known universe, some are going to be worse than others. I have never heard a dogman story that sounded very pleasant. I've never heard anybody say, yeah, and then like we left some bread out and the dogman left us a shiny rock. I've never heard of that. You hear that with the Bigfoot, people talking about Bigfoot and all that. And again, my logic, for a long time, I kind of giggled at this kind of stuff. But when something happens to you, it sure changes your mindset. You stop giggling and you start listening very closely to what people say. You start picking up on the things that are similar to what you saw, similar to what you experienced, things that you can say, hey, yeah, that's right, I felt that. That's it. That was the feeling that I had. Obviously, not everybody's going to have the same reaction. Not everybody's going to have the same, not everything's going to happen the same to each person. I look at thrill people who jump off mountains and almost die and then parachute down to the bottom. And those people obviously are going to probably react different than I would. Some of the military people who've been in high-stress situations probably going to react different to those of us who have not been in those high-stress situations. But the one thing that seems to be universal is that it profoundly changes people when you see one of these creatures. And it took years for me to figure out what it was. For the first several years, 3-4 years, I didn't even think about it. I didn't go in the woods. I didn't go fishing. I stopped. That part of my life was over. It just was done. And I wasn't about to tell anybody. I was, I thought maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm nuts. I'm not going to tell anybody. There's no way. No one's going to believe me. Even my mom. It took me years to tell my mother. My girlfriend, it took me several years to tell her. It takes took a lot of trust to say to somebody, hey, look, I had this experience and I saw something. And I don't know what it was. But I know it was there and it was real. And it moved in a way that It was either the biggest man with the biggest head ever with pointy ears, and that's probably the only thing that I had that I could think about, and I've thought very hard about this, was I can remember the ears. It's the only thing solid that I've got. That and the tracks. And the tracks, gosh, I wish I had a picture. Vic, I'll tell you what, the picture, it's not to show the world. I don't care about the world. It would be for me, so that I could compare it. So I found some photos online, actually through your Facebook group. I found some photos that were exactly what I had seen. In fact, they were so exactly what I had seen that it was muddy, and it had stepped in, and what had happened was two of the toes, or whatever you call them, the paws, they had actually sort of almost melded together. So it looked like instead of having 4 paws, it was 3. That was exactly what I saw. One of the people on your Facebook group had a picture, and I remember seeing it and going, that's what I saw. I'm pretty sure it was either on your group or through your group, somebody in there. And I found those pictures and I went, wow, that's what I saw. And it makes you feel good because, then you don't feel like I'm not crazy. I really did see it. My brother won't talk about it. Never has, never will, I don't think. I'm almost sure he saw something. And I don't think he knew how to deal with it. And this guy plays video games most of his life. So, to suddenly be face-to-face with something like that, I don't even think. Although I felt kind of bad. He didn't say, hey, man, let's get out of here. He just sort of ran, left me there. But through the research, you look and you look. It's those paws. The paw prints is really all I have. As I researched and tried to find out, what is this? What could it have been? Is it Bigfoot? Bigfoots don't have claws. It took years. And last year, I heard, it was through one of the Bigfoot shows, one of the podcasts, somebody mentioned a dog man. And I had heard rumblings of a Michigan dog man at some point, but to be honest, I figured it was folklore, something, just whatever. I didn't believe it was real. I started looking into it more and more, and I found your podcast. I want to say this was last summer. And that's when, for the first time, as I started to look into your stuff and listen to the accounts on your show, and there was one in particular where a young woman tells her story about her and her friend and how they had taken a trip down to buy something from some gypsies, and she talks about on the way back being chased down by one of these things. And you could hear in her voice she had a very startling, very serious experience, and she quivered. I quivered with her. I remembered that feeling, that it was like in your gut. They say flight or fight. If I had been 10 feet from this thing, there would have been nothing. I would have just looked to the ground. I don't know what I would have done. What am I going to do? You can't run that thing. But it took me many years to figure out to even come to some sort of, what could this be? Obviously, I wish I had definitive proof. And again, I think for a lot of people, it's just the only reason why I'd ever want to see one, and from about 1.5 miles to 2 miles away, wouldn't be for anything other than just to verify, yep, that's it. That's the shadow. That's the thing in the woods. That's what I saw that day. I'm not crazy. There it is. And some of the art that people draw greatly resembles that shadow I saw that day. And I didn't sleep a lot when I first found your podcast. I had a lot of sleepless nights, and I remember laughing one night because at first what I decided to do, because the kids, I would wait till they go to bed, and then I'd lay there and listen to your podcast, and then I realized I was like a little kid again. I couldn't sleep with the lights off. I had to have the lights on. I felt like a little kid again as I was listening and remembering. It took a long time. Even now, though, and I started having nightmares after you and I spoke, and I told the story in detail, really, for the first time. And I thought about it a lot, obviously. Every time my daughter goes to YMCA camp, I freak out. And they laugh at me. The kids laugh at me, but they know deep down I'm serious. They know. I'm like, you guys, seriously, you always have someone with you. You just never. And I just think of that Garrett Bardsley boy. That boy, what happened to him? Because here's the thing. If a mountain lion takes you, there's going to be blood, there's going to be there's going to be stuff. There's going to be ripped clothing. You're going to hear something, hear the kid scream, even if it's a bear. There was a girl, I think in the UK or something, and a bear attacked her. She was able to actually call her mother on the phone. So it's not like they necessarily just kill you in one swoop. I believe bears start eating you while you're alive. So you have some time. So you're going to scream. You're going to freak out. And these people go missing, and sometimes you hear about like grown men that go missing, and they don't find anything. And you have to wonder, like, what on earth is strong enough to take a man, a grown man, and all you might find, if anything, is a sock or a article of clothing. I know, like, when it's wintertime, they blame it on paradoxical undressing. I've done some research, and I can't find any instances of people who are climbing Mount Everest who froze to death and took their clothes off. So that would be a great place to find evidence that paradoxical undressing is really something that happens when people freeze to death. But, then you hear this happened during the summer with Garrett Bartley. There was a hunter, Tom Messick, I think the guy's name was. He was 82, Troy, New York. They were out hunting. So he's an older guy, 82. That was in November, I think. Guy went missing. Not a trace. Just gone. It's crazy when you start looking into some of these stories. These people just, nobody knows where they went. And that's why I think it's dangerous when people talk about, be friends with the Bigfoot and go out there and go find the dog man. Don't go find a dog man. You don't ever want to see a dog man. Unless you see one and you just want to know that you're not crazy. You don't want to see a dog man. You don't want to go out there. You don't do that. I don't understand it. I don't understand why people want to go out there and approach these things, because it only takes one time for it to turn deadly. And then that's it.
Yeah, I never will understand why people do go out and seek out interactions with dogmen. It just doesn't make sense to me, but I guess to each their own. Here's the most important question of the night, Damien. After this interview, do you think you're going to be able to deal with that encounter you had better, or do you think it's going to make any difference at all?
After you and I spoke the first time, I started having some nightmares, some bad dreams, and it's calmed down. But for a few weeks there, it was pretty rough. I wish I knew. I think if I knew the answer to that question, if it were a positive thing, I would have done it a long time ago. If it was a negative thing, I probably wouldn't have come on and talked to you. I think it's always therapeutic for people to talk about things that have affected them negatively. I think it's important for people to get out emotion. I think it's important for people to face fears. I was in Manhattan on 9/11. That's probably the other scariest moment of my life. And the first thing I did, Vic, was the second that I could, I got on a plane and I flew out west. Why? Because I was scared. I was scared to get on a plane. I'm sure thousands of people were scared to get on airplanes. And I went on a JetBlue flight. I'll never forget it. The pilot came on and said, "Hey, I've got a big axe up here, so if anybody causes any problems, let me know. We'll use the axe." And everybody laughed and sort of broke the ice, and the flight out to LA was great. But I wasn't downtown. I was in Midtown. As we were running back uptown, I worked on 44th Street at the time, and not too far away, about 10 blocks away, was the Empire State Building. And, of course, that's what was running through our heads was, well, they hit the Twin Towers, so Empire State Building's next. And Broadway. I worked at a theater on Broadway, so I'm like, Broadway, Times Square. We were all freaking out. It was a really scary moment. And obviously that changed our country. That changed the world. I will tell you that my encounter in the woods in Utah changed me just as profoundly. And it was really difficult because I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I could talk to my friends about 9/11. I could talk to my family about 9/11. And for a while it was difficult, and I didn't necessarily want to talk about it because it made me angry. But as you asked, will it make you feel better? It did. I felt a lot better expressing my outrage and my anger and my frustration and all the different feelings that our skyline was changed forever. But this was something where I couldn't explain it. How do you tell somebody, hey, so I was in the woods and I saw this gigantic beast of a thing, and it scared me, and it was so intense that the crickets and the flies and all the insects stopped moving, and that's how scary it was. Most people are going to look at me and go, Damien, you need to get some rest and lie down for a few hours, and they're going to pat you on the back and send you on your way. They're not going to take you seriously. They're not going to listen to you, and I think that's why I didn't tell anybody for a long time. I told my mom. In fact, I started to tell her probably 2 or 3 times before I think I actually told her. My mom, she's spiritual in her way, and she believes in God, and she's religious, and I think for her that helps her. I think she thinks that there are things out there that she probably takes it more from a religious standpoint. I take this from I don't know what standpoint. I listen to people who say that a lot of the sightings happen near Indian burial grounds and stuff like that. I have no idea what to think of that. As I try to apply my way of thinking to what happened to me, it's hard sometimes because I'm a fact-driven person. I want to prove it was or it wasn't. I watched a TV show recently where a psychologist showed how people will look at an object and see a face. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I didn't see a face. I saw a being. I saw a body. I saw a huge body. I saw a shadow. I didn't see its face. I wish I'd seen its face. Because then I could say, yeah, that's what happened to me. I saw a face in the woods. I saw something move. It wasn't a tree. I haven't seen too many trees that walk around. So you're always looking for something. You're looking for something to either tell you you made it up in your head or you're right and it's real. And that's what's crazy about this whole subject. Bigfoot and then dogmen and all these creatures of the night and stuff, what's their purpose? What are they here for? But Vic, the one thing that I think when it comes down to it, though, is we have to look to our past. Because dogmen were revered thousands of years ago. As I've done some of my research, you look at the Egyptians, they revered dogmen. American Indians, there are drawings out there of dogmen, of Bigfoot. So these creatures, these legends, these myths, this lore has been there for a long, long, long time, all over the world. So what's their purpose? Why are they here? I don't know. I have heard all the different stories. Well, maybe they come from, I've heard aliens drop them here to watch us. I've heard they come through portals. I've heard that they're not really real, but they are real. It's all these things. And I saw something. It was physical. It was real. It was there. It moved. It didn't float. There was no smoke around it. It was a physical thing, just like I've seen animals in the forest before. It was there. And then I think a lot of the people that I listen to that I truly believe, I think, I'm not saying there's not a supernatural tendency to this. What I would say is the paranormal is probably a better term, because all paranormal means is it's beyond what's normal. It's just not normal. These are paranormal. They are not normal. And they scare the out of me. I won't sleep tonight, Vic, but I'm hoping that, in time. And it's been nice. I've talked to 1 or 2 people after meeting you and talking to you, and some of the people who've also had some issues, had something they saw and had a hard time chatting about it.
If it does help you in any way doing this show, then that's what it's all about. That's really good news. One thing I want to clarify, though, is didn't you say earlier in the interview that you definitely did see canine-style ears on top of its head?
I did. That's probably the only definitive body, other than the head. The head was huge. I saw ears. And that's why I was like, you can't be a bear. I looked to see, are there any bears out there that have ears like that? Or that can bears' ears ever become pointy like that? So if I had to explain the ear shape to you, I would say Doberman is probably the best ear shape I can tell you. Bigger than a Doberman pinscher, but that's the kind of ear shape I saw. And again, you have to remember, as I'm looking at it, so it had just gotten rain and it was, cloudy and dark, and as I was looking down, it was literally like an outline of shadows. It was the outline of this animal, and the ears were definitive. I could see the ears. In my dreams, I can see the snout and everything, but that's just my dreams. I could not make out the facial features, which is the one thing that I really, as scared as I was, I really wish I had seen that just to define it more for me. The experience, though, Vic, it doesn't matter. The fear that I felt was so intense that I have never felt that again. Pretend things don't shake us like that. They don't change you like that. Only real things change people like that. And sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself, and I'm telling myself, like, it's okay. It's okay. It was real. You're not going nuts. And yeah, and I'm not. So I may go to the lake to try to take some photos for you, so you can see the lake. I was joking with my girlfriend. I said it's therapy, to go out there during the midday with probably an M16 and a sawed-off shotgun. And I mean, but you hear the stories that people shoot them with these high-powered rifles, and they still keep coming. How about that? Whoa, what is that all about?
Yeah, that is awfully strange. Yeah, some of the really strange stories like that are ones you haven't heard. I haven't shared them publicly, but they still make you scratch your head and say, what are we dealing with here? Well, I'll tell you what, we're about out of time. We're going to have to wrap this up, but I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of that encounter with us. I really do appreciate it.
If I could just have one last thing just to say, just to reiterate to people, don't go looking for it. You don't want to. You think you do. When you find it, you'll realize you did not want to find what you found. You don't want to experience it. Ignorance is bliss. In this case, it really... I mean, on the other hand, though, I hope that through your show, people's lives are saved because they're aware that there's a possibility something's out there that's just beyond their abilities, their scope, and their reason. And that maybe people will, instead of going out alone, they'll bring a friend or two when they go hiking or camping or whatever it is they go doing, and maybe less people will go missing without a trace and stuff like that.
Those are all really good words. Well, thanks again so much for coming on, Damien. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Vic. I appreciate you, and have a great night.
You too. We'll talk to you later.
Take care.